I think we can. Okay. So I think we can already start. There's a couple of new faces here, and I think I'd like to start by introducing you a bit to the context of this project, and by introducing myself. I'm Maria from MKBT. So a bit about the context of this session today. Between 2022 and 2023, we started working on a project called Capitalizing on Abandoned Spaces for Community and Ecotourism, where we visited and documented several typologies of abandoned spaces in the country, and specifically in the 7 eco-destinations supported by the Romanian American Foundation, where we interviewed various teams active in revitalization in Romania, and also created the latent emergent community of practice, not only for those active in revitalization, but also for those interested in heritage. In the community, we have had several meetings and online meetups during which we addressed various topics of interest for the community, like, for example, how do we even start revitalization, what are the challenges that we encounter, to the concept of heritage interpretation as a strategic and mindful approach to understanding and communicating the value of heritage to visitors in the community, to fundraising, for example. We also organized 2 field visits to the Banfi Castle and to the Shona village in Brașov, where we eventually met the community and tried to also test the ground for a more applied or practical and broad support for those who do revitalization, for the heritage stewards, as we would call them. So this brings us to the larger program that we have today, and that we are implementing at the present for the next 3 years. It's called Heritage Stewardship Support Program, and it's made of 3 components. One of them is the SKIS. This is a program for capacity building and mentoring for 7 organizations active in heritage revitalization. And we just announced last week the 7 organizations selected through an open call for this program. The second component is strengthening this community, latent emergent community, through sessions such as this one and other similar meetings. And the third component would be to improve the legal and public policy framework in the field of revitalization of latent built heritage. And coming to today's session, I'd like to welcome our guests, Silvia and Ștefan. They are both people who wear many hats, but they are researchers and practitioners with experience in social network analysis in civil society and in the cultural sector. And today's talk, in broad terms, will be about how we better observe and understand the offline communities and the physical networks we are part of, and how we take first steps to assess the creation of consolidation of social capital. And we will do this by looking at this instrument, that social network analysis method, with explanations and examples from Silvia and Ștefan. And the meeting is also relevant in the context of our program, the SKIS, where we plan to apply the social network analysis at the beginning, at the end of the program, to analyze how the support networks acting around the heritage objectives selected are structured and will evolve in time. And I would also like to welcome Sophie, our intern from Germany, as I said previously, who has been and maybe still is in Shona, I'm not very sure, where we are also doing a first iteration, like a first attempt to assess the collaborative and the collaborative network in Shona. And Sophie, if you'd like to say a few words at the end, that would be lovely. And wrapping it up, I'd like to welcome Silvia. And yeah, Silvia, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure for me to get to know you a bit today and, maybe have a productive and interesting discussion about how the methodology of social network analysis can help you in your work. I prepared some slides for you for today, just a basic introduction into the methodology, just to see how intuitive and simple it actually is, how it requires just maybe a little bit of a research design thinking. The data in principle is easy or are easy to collect, but we will be able to talk maybe in the discussion session things related to the ethics of it, things related to response rate, things related to maybe go a bit in detail into the results and what to do with the results after you measure anything like this. I prepared also some examples from my work with Ștefan and with other people from our community. And I will try to share my screen and you tell me if you can see my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
All right. So at this point, I do not see your faces anymore. So if there are, you can interrupt me at any point in time. I'm happy to clarify anything, discuss anything, and so on. So just a little bit about myself. What I wanted to show with this slide is basically the fact that this methodology is very flexible. It's more like a worldview rather than just a research methodology. It's a way of really understanding the world as being interconnected, as the fact that, the different actors that influence policy making, decision making, action mobilization, and things like that, they are interdependent. And if you understand, one case study, I think you would be able to very easily transfer that knowledge to other case studies as well. So I use this methodology in academia, in government, in business, and in civil society with the aim of mapping ecosystems, identifying key players within them, identifying the gaps and the strengths of these ecosystems. And then most importantly, my main concern is really what do we do after we learn something about the ecosystem and the people or the organizations that can, move and shake and change the ecosystem moving forward. So what is really nice about network analysis as a methodology is that it's very actionable. So once you understand a little bit about how to use it, I think you can start using it from day one. Although I do have to advise you to maybe get into a little bit more reading after you hear about this methodology, simply because it is a sociological exercise that I think requires also to understand the context where you apply it.
Silvia, sorry for interrupting. Can you please press slideshow, because we see it now as we don't see it in presenter mode.
Oh, I see, because I see it in presenter mode. That's very interesting.
Perhaps you need to share a different window.
Maybe I need to share the entire screen or something like that. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes, now it's good. Yes.
All right. All right. So what is network analysis and when is it useful? Basically, the way to think about it is that, we can have these nodes, these bubbles that are connected through different types of interactions they have. The bubbles can be anything from people to organizations, to countries, to concepts. And the interactions among them can be almost anything as well. So it can be friendships, it can be collaboration, it can be animosities, positive or negative types of interactions as well. And you can have different types of information about these interactions. So you can say, is somebody a friend or not? Are two people friends or not? And then you connect them. Or you can say, these two people are best friends versus these two people are just acquaintances. And then you can have different thicknesses of the edges in order to represent the strength of the connection between these people. But once you identify and you map out the ecosystem or the community in a certain way, analytically, you can calculate who are the most central people in that ecosystem. And here with centrality, you can have different types of centrality. So you can have people who are very popular, or you can have people who you don't have many connections, but they do intermediate in the network in a very strategic and important way. Or you can identify communities, you can identify who are in the periphery of the system, you can identify different types of patterns that repeat themselves in the interactions among the different actors, and so on. What is really interesting is that the interpretation of a particular ecosystem is very context dependent. So for example, if we are talking about an ecosystem through which there's a virus being transmitted, you perhaps wouldn't want to be the hub or, the most connected person, the person who has, first of all, the risk of getting the virus from the system as quickly as possible, or passing it to other people in a very quick manner because of the level of connectivity they have. But if this is a network of, popularity, then perhaps you would want to be the most connected person because you are in the know with respect to what, information flows, for example, from the network. And you can also inform your audience in a particular way from that position. The way I use it, and it is used, but the way I use it generally in my applied work is, in the area of change management. And here I work a lot with companies, for example, who are doing, mergers and acquisitions or culture change or things like that, where they need the right people at the decision-making table in order to align them and together to, get involved into changing, making the change process more effective and more successful eventually. I use it a lot in ecosystem development, like, one of the examples I will show you today, which is the cultural ecosystem in Timișoara. What have we learned from the title of the capital of culture, and how can we continue to support the development of the cultural ecosystem? I use it in diversity, equity, and inclusion in decision-making exercises, precisely because we can show very easily with network analysis the dangers of siloed, ways of working, of exclusion, of diversity and inclusion, and different types of voices in the decision-making process. And then analytically as well, or evidence-based, we can make recommendations about whom to connect to whom in order to actually bring in resources that we haven't previously had, which improves the decision-making process. I use it in communication, trust, and mobilization, simply because these are the three main areas of interaction among the nodes that I'm particularly interested in. How do people communicate with one another within an organization? How do people trust each other, for example, within an organization or the civil society at large? How do people mobilize around different key points or key actions? Who are the mobilizers? Who are the people to best bridge among information flows, communication flows? How is trust basically transferred within a social ecosystem? And then finally, other use cases are around social resilience and anti-fragility. What do I mean by the two? So resilience is really the amount and the patterns of connectivity within a community allow us to resist different shocks. So what happens, is the particular community resilient when it comes to losing certain nodes or certain edges or certain people, certain organizations, or certain types of interactions? Can it withstand the community or the organization or the ecosystem, can it withstand these changes? But not only that, going a step further, how can we, once we have, let's say, a resilient ecosystem that doesn't, completely fragment and break down when you have a shock into it, how can you work with how can you implement certain mechanisms in order for the network to learn from itself, so to say? That brings the element of anti-fragility. So how do we empower the actors within a community or the ecosystem to continue to bring things back to the network so that this resilience transforms into mechanisms of learning about adaptability, basically, when things change. So it's a really interesting and very nice methodology that I fully recommend you to be inspired by. The way we collect usually data, network data, are in three broad categories. We can do interviews, we can do questionnaires, and we can trace digital data that is already available. Now, the recommended data collection method really depends on the problem you're trying to solve. For example, it turned out that for Shona and what Sophie did, the best way to go about it was interviews. When I was doing anti-corruption research, which is the topic of my PhD, for example, it turned out that interviews were the worst type of methodology that you can use, technique that you can use, because people like to point to other people who are involved in corruption, never to themselves, right? So it was the subjective type of methodology that wasn't very productive. So there I had to switch to, let's look at contract data. Let's look at, paperwork that connects to different organizations where we can calculate risks of corruption. Questionnaires I use a lot in organizations. It's perception data, but with network analysis, the recommendation is to really go for entire populations. So try in an organization or in a community to cover as much as possible of that community with, asking them to nominate people they interact with in particular ways. When it comes to the types of questions we are asking, in general, I would say look at these 5 different categories and try to find questions around them, simply because they are, they can, first of all, communication is the basis for everything. So you will find traces of communication data, whether you ask the people or you follow, you try to analyze any digital trace data. So you will always find a communication angle network data that you can look into. Then you can ask them about cohesion. So how do they form groups with other people? What attracts them to to the community, or to a particular project, or to a particular, vision of an activity that they do together? Who do they trust? And you can think of trust not as, it can be a very broadly understood, the people can have very different definitions about trust, but there could be multiple questions, multiple dimensions that together they bring, they encompass a trust element. You can also look for who collaborates with whom, and you can look for questions of who is able to mobilize whom. And just to give an example, in the organizations where we do this, we have 18 different questions on 5 different dimensions, mostly around these key topics that together basically compose 2 broad dimensions. One would be professional acknowledgement and the other one social connectivity, simply because these 2 make a lot of sense for the for the company type of structure and questions. But obviously the more you get into the society with this, the more you will have different dimensions that you might construct through your questions. The active versus passive is the same that I was telling you with the questionnaire or the digital data. Active data collection means that you ask the people for the information. Passive data collection is that you look for information that already exists around them. And again, if we are talking about, if there's an interest or a research question related to how people connect to one another, then you might have, very specific questions related to how people interact. But when you speak about organizations and your interest is in organizations and how organizations interact, then a lot of times I actually advise and recommend that you go for passive data collection and for objective type of data, such as contracts, agreements, memorandums of understanding, financial transactions, participation in events and projects, collaboration of different kind. Just to show you, if you collect network data, then you would need minimum 2 files, or actually maximum 2 files. You need 2 files, Excel files. So it's very simple. The data structure is very simple. You have the edge list and the node list. In the edge list, you have people nominating each other on the questions. So Anna nominated Dennis as being a friend. Dennis nominated Anna back. Sometimes you don't have reciprocity, right? Anna nominated Christy, but Christy didn't nominate Anna back. He nominated Emma, and so on. So people, when they answer your questions, this is the type of data structure that you will get. Now, at the minimum, you can have, these 2 columns, but you can add information about the relationship. So for example, you can add the 3rd column, which is called, I don't know, relationship strength, where you can put Anna and Dennis called each other 3 times. Anna called Dennis 3 times. Dennis called Anna back 5 times. And then you will start having numbers in the 3rd column, which gives you the strength of that particular relationship. The second file, you can also put, if it's an organization, for example, and you're looking at organization data, you can add perhaps a 3rd column that takes into account the time dimension. When did 2 organizations collaborate with one another? They collaborated from 1990 until 2024, or they collaborated in 22, or they collaborated in 24, and so on. The second file that you need is information about your nodes. So if you have people, then, maybe you're interested in the gender, in the interest that they have, in any other kinds of attributes that they might have, the organization they represent, the sector they represent, the years in service they've had in a particular domain. I don't know, anything that you can add as many columns as you want around this. For organizations, it would be the same. The type of organization it is, whether it's a public, private, or different, subsectoral information about the organizations.
Silvia, before you move to the next question, there was a question in the chat box which says, what is a snowball sampling?
Very good. A snowball sampling is the idea, if you're aware of the Ashoka Changemakers map, that's an exercise where they use the snowball sampling. So the idea is that you start interviewing from a select, let's say 10 people. These are the most visible 10 people, change makers in Romania. You know about these, 10 change makers. You go to them and you ask them questions, among which a question such as, please, nominate 10 people that we should interview, that you consider as being change makers, that we should interview. And then, based on those recommendations, you go to each person from 1 to 10 and interview them and ask them the same to nominate other change makers they know. And you do this iteratively, and then when you start seeing that the same names start, repeating themselves, you kind of understood that you've hit the boundary of the ecosystem, and you can maybe stop the data collection. There are advantages and disadvantages with each methodology, obviously. What is very important about snowball sampling is the representativity of the seed interviewees. Why? Because the method, network analysis, is very sensitive to the visibility of the nodes in the ecosystem, right? Because it's a very subjective method. You're asking people to nominate people they know. People they know means, they interact with the most, or they see in the ecosystem the most. Now, this a lot of time misses out people who are doing amazing work, but who are not perhaps as vocal or as visible within the ecosystem. So as a researcher doing this, you have to think about, am I selecting individuals from the appropriate groups represented in, let's say, the change-making area? And then you start going from there. And you always need to be careful of this visibility bias, let's say. All right? If there are other questions I don't know, so you just have to interrupt me and tell me, okay? Because I cannot see you. I see only my slides.
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you. Now, before we go into the example, I would still want to give you a bit of information so that you understand what you see when we look at it, right? With network analysis, the beauty of it, and also what is challenging about it, is that it's very rich in information. So once you collect this information and you map out the ecosystem, you can look at it at very different levels. You can look at the ecosystem level, which is, the entire thing, and ask yourself, is this a fragmented ecosystem? Do I have isolated individuals? Is this a centralized or super hierarchical network, or is it more decentralized? Then you can go one step further and say, what are the communities that emerge in this ecosystem? Meaning, what are the groups that form and interact more with one another? Are they, further apart from one another? Are they overlapping a lot? And so on. Then you can go one level further and say, who are the key players in this ecosystem? Who are the most important, most central people in the ecosystem? And here you can have different positions, different network positions that bear influence on the ecosystem, that look very different or have different things. And then you can ask yourself, are the same individuals inhabiting those positions, or can we find different individuals who have very interesting positions in the network? And then finally, you can look at different subsegments of that. You can look at the ego networks of a particular person or organization. You can look at, just the network of females or the network of males. You can look just at, let's say any segmentation that you can think of and is relevant, and you collect information on in the beginning for your interests.
Can I ask something?
Maybe? Please.
How does a resilient community look like?
I'll show you a few examples, actually.
Okay. Yes. So now I was looking, like, these layers are really interesting, but it's useful to use them as a characterization of an. Okay, so
yes,
I'll wait.
I'll show you. Yes. And if you want to go into this, then I do recommend that you use this open source software called Gephi. It's it has a very nice interface. It's very easy to use. So I would be even happy to show you around the software. All right. One other thing, when we look at the ecosystem itself, you can have different structures that you see, and the different structures basically have different mechanisms that create those structures. So for example, you probably heard about the small world effect, where, everybody, the world is like a village. We are very close to everybody else. We are part of small groups, small communities that offer us familiarity and support. But these groups are connected to one another through key individuals that basically shrink the distances among us. A network like that, the mechanisms that recurrently produce a network like that are generally homophily and transitivity. Homophily means, we are attracted to people who are very similar to us. Transitivity means that we're doing this transfer of trust. So if Marina and I have a very good work relationship, and Ștefan and I have a very good relationship, when I recommend Marina to work with Ștefan, the spark between the two of them will be just, a heightened trust interaction, because they both trust me. You've probably, experienced this kind of thing as well. And we have this natural tendency when we meet new people to ask whether we have common friends, because that basically makes us, it gives us this familiarity that we are similar in some way, and it increases the level of trust between us. Then we can have, and Facebook, for example, could be a small world network. Then we have, scale-free networks, and those are more like Twitter in their structure. So you have these hubs, these influencers, so to say, social media influencers, who are super, very, very, very well connected. But the problem with that particular structure is that it doesn't have cohesion. So it doesn't have the, this transfer of trust, this transitivity happening there. There's the mechanism that creates this kind of network structure is called preferential attachment. So we intentionally attach to certain people who are more visible than us because of the advantages that come with that, usually information. If you think about, I don't know, just the internet and you want to create a website, then Google will be a hub. When you create a website, you want to connect to Google, index it on Google, because Google offers you visibility in the entire ecosystem. The problem, however, is that this preferential attachment mechanism creates a state of inequality in the network where the rich get richer. So by connecting to Google, we give more power to Google. And we are still, you have to do a lot of effort to create cohesion around you because Google doesn't do it by default. And then finally, you can have core periphery network structures where if you think about it, the world trade would be an example of that, where you have the global north, doing a lot of global trade with each other, creating this cohesive core. And then you have the semi-periphery and the periphery, which is generally the global south, countries which are dependent on one particular, let's say, economic type of interaction with other countries, which are very vulnerable, right? The problem with the core periphery network is that the periphery in general is in a state of vulnerability, depending very specifically on certain organizations or countries, and not being able to have choices when it comes to interaction. The mechanisms here are basically a combination of the two, right? In the core, you find a lot of homophily and transitivity, transfer of trust. In the periphery, you find this preferential attachment and unequal mechanisms. There could also be key roles, network roles, and here I will mention the three most common ones. So the popular nodes or people or organizations, the people who attract a lot of attention, visibility, connectivity from other people. There could be influential people. And again, being popular doesn't necessarily mean you're influential. In order to be influential, you have to be well-connected to well-connected others. And then finally, you can have the connectors, or people who bridge among otherwise unconnected parts of the ecosystem. Now, from all these three different roles, you have the possibility to act in different ways. So, for example, if you're a popular person, then you can facilitate access to information to many more people. If you're an influential person, then you can facilitate the access to resources. You can mobilize basically much more easily within the entire ecosystem than if you're just, popular. And then if you're a connector, then you are basically uniquely positioned within the network so that you see what happens on the left, what happens on the right, and you are the only person who can do something with that information. Again, on the positive side, you can innovate. On the negative side, you can become a bottleneck. So any questions before we go to the examples? Maybe I also look at you first.
That's super interesting. I'm wondering if any of you would reflect a bit what kind of organization you have, like the small world, the what was the other one?
Game free or core periphery?
Yeah. Core periphery or. Mm-hmm.
Just to mention, like Ștefan, if you remember the first exercise we've done with the Făgăraș Research Institute back when it wasn't an institute yet, it was still a network of collaborations of people from all over the place. It was a scale-free network because Ștefan was the person holding everything together, right? Holding the network together. And I told him then that, this is a very vulnerable position for him. First of all, because he is in collaboration overload. And second, because he needs to build capacity within the network. How does he do that? He needs to build transitivity, cohesion. He needs to empower his collaborators to collaborate with one another. So that's, the beauty of seeing these, ecosystems evolve. You can act on them with very simple information, very simple actions, but the result can actually be, mean sustainability for the whole thing. Now Făgăraș Research Institute is doing much better in terms of sustainability of the organization because it incorporated these core informed decisions about the development of the organization.
No, I'll suggest we move forward because I know that
I have a question, if I may. Sorry. So I understand that you're conducting these analyses for certain organizations in like different development stages. In your opinion, what is the development stage where these analyses, I don't know, derive, like bring most value for organizations?
Good question. So generally, I am called in, so to say. So people want these analyses when there's a fundamental change happening, and they want to understand how do we capitalize on that change. Like we have an opportunity to, let's say, transform in a certain way. We would either want to understand what's happening now and how to make the transformation, or we just transformed from one state to another and we want to consolidate that moving forward. Mm-hmm. That's generally when they call me. Now I would, I've had talks, even as I mentioned with Ștefan, right, with organizations that haven't even started as being organizations in the beginning. They were just, unstructured networks of people that then built an organization on the basics of these, principles. And I've also had organizations that have been, fully developed with a lot of things that just did that in order to, let's say, build the loyalty of the people, the best people they've had. Because, losing some of the key players in the ecosystem, can be very, very disruptive to the organization or to the community. And then for a lot of organizations that is at stake, how do we make these people continue with us? And usually by involving them in the decision-making and the planning and the everything.
All right, thank you.
All right, so let me show you some examples. And I will start with the Timișoara ecosystem. Basically what we did was we looked at the bid books. We had two bid books, one in 2016 and an updated one in 2022. And we looked basically at what the concept of the title of the European Capital of Culture in Timișoara was promised. Like what were the organizations, how did the organizations say in the bid book that they will collaborate in implementing this title in Timișoara? And then we looked into 2023 at how did it actually happen. So we could basically trace the evolution of the ecosystem in that sense. So this is the 2016. And what you see here, for me, it was actually when I first looked at this ecosystem before 2023 and knowing what, even imagining what would happen, I was thinking, uh-oh, this is not okay. This is a fragmented network. So already by, the design of the program, we are not thinking about an integrated community that implements this. We are thinking about, components that together can, but they do need a lot of alignment, right, in order to do that. A second thing that I've observed there is the centralization around one key organization and this star configurations that you see everywhere, right? With a hub in the middle and then many partners, but the partners themselves, there's no cohesion around them. But then we started looking at the, the evolution, the updated version of that. And already in the updated version, I think there were, a few, again, design concepts that brought the community much more together. We still see in the periphery, the hub and spoke configuration, but we see a lot more cohesion around key players in this version of it. And then this is what happened in 2023. The ecosystem basically grew a lot. I will show you a few numbers as well. So in between what was promised and what was delivered was actually a huge leap forward in the sense that it was much more than what was promised, so to say. let me show you. So we had, more than 1,000 organizations implementing this. I estimated around 7,000 people organizing events last year, more than 280 projects implemented. That meant more than 2,300 events implemented, more than 1,500 partnerships. And the ecosystem growth from 2022 to 2023 was by 2.4 times, meaning that if in the 2022 bid book there were I think 300 organizations involved, in 2023 there were more than 800, actually more than 1,000, right? But what was really interesting was the level of cohesion that we've seen in the collaboration among all these organizations that was very counterintuitive to what the theory was saying. The level of cohesion grew by 4.5 times. And network theory tells us that when the ecosystem grows, basically more than doubles in size, we should see less cohesion, not more. But what we saw was a lot of cohesion. And here the key players that were in the ecosystem before had the fundamental role in creating this transfer of trust within the ecosystem that created this beautiful, what they call it in the qualitative interviews, spirit of Timișoara in 2023, which was, us, I think it was, a huge gain and development of the community. We didn't have that much of that spirit before.
So Silvia, cohesion means peripheral edges collaborated with one another, in brief.
It means closing triangles.
Sorry?
It means closing triangles.
Okay.
Right. So if I previously collaborated with you and with Ștefan, now I did a lot more of this bridging, like closing the triangles where you and Ștefan started collaborating as well.
Okay.
So this transfer of trust, basically this, I don't know how to call it, openness for cooperation. In a way, I think that was the main driver of it, and the main gain, basically, like, understanding that we are in this together and we just have to get this done, and we're just going to collaborate and cooperate at the level that we didn't do before. That created a lot of innovation as well, because obviously, once you put two different people together, they have very different. This is why diversity was very, very important in basically sparking innovation. It also forced a lot of professionalization, because the modes of communication, cooperation, and innovation, the processes and everything just needed more professional takes on them. In terms of what we've won, well, I think, innovation in the funding scheme for culture, this, gaining more partnerships and more trust among the operators, gaining a lot in accessibility by involving in the accessibility, organization, very diverse organizations, and involving them, including them basically in the decision-making process. We've gained a lot in the public realm of opening debates about a bunch of things. The culture is uncomfortable sometimes, and that was fantastic, because it allowed for dialogue at a different level than before. We've basically gained new cultural spaces that were activated through the events, new people that, either moved to Timișoara to continue the work here, or stay close to Timișoara through the, the projects that continue to happen, and different ideas that, are able to now feed back. And this is this element of, going towards anti-fragility, ideas that feed back into the ecosystem, making it more, learning more from itself and being more adaptive to different changes. What it really entailed, it didn't entail only network analysis. It really entailed quantitative analysis of all the contract data that was available, network analysis, so looking at how organizations collaborated with one another on implementing the program, and then qualitative analysis in understanding, the perceptions of the key actors, the most influential organizations in the ecosystem, about, what happened, and most importantly, what have we gained that we want to continue. We then did a participatory consultation. I need to update that. We will do it at the end of May with 150 people or 120 people. Vera Marin, I don't know if you're still in the call, so Vera will be leading that particular one. And she also did public consultation, participatory planning with people from all the different parts of the mayor's office, coordinating on the legacy plan of the title of the capital. The legacy plan is basically our a main interest is to create create data-driven decision, evidence-based decision making when it comes to how do we support, how does the city support the development of the cultural ecosystem in the next years. Any questions about the Timișoara ecosystem?
I have a question.
Please.
I was wondering if cohesion leads directly to resilience. And if it's safe to assume that a network that is newly formed around the preparation of such an event, if it's safe to assume that it will stay the same or grow further, or is there the risk of this network shrinking back to a previous stage?
Yes. Well, it is natural to think that this will shrink back. So if I was to map the cultural ecosystem now in 2024, obviously it will not look like this, because the question was, whom do you collaborated with in implementing the program? So this is just looking at effectively the collaboration happening in 2023. The projects have ended, which means that in 2024, you will not have as an organization the same partners or even the same projects as before. And networks in general are very dynamic creatures. It's, what we are looking at are these snapshots in time that, will most likely change. But what is really, I think, fundamental for these ecosystems to be able to activate and deactivate around different opportunities and constraints, you can even think about natural disasters and stuff, like mobilization around natural disasters and stuff like that, is the key component of collaboration and trust. The fact that, and this is also why I advocated, although I had a little bit of questions around that, why didn't you look at the people who did stuff? And I said, because people do not institutionalize things, organizations institutionalize things. Why didn't you look at communication measured in different ways? And I mentioned, well, contracts are what institutionalize trust and cooperation long-term. They create precedents that, are, I think, our best proxy to, recent histories that we can follow up upon when time comes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Right. So again, the choice of the edges and the nodes is fundamental for for what you're trying to do. If the problem we try to solve is how do we continue to build the sustainability of the cultural ecosystem, then we had to look for elements that talk about this sort of institutional resilience, institutional ecosystem resilience, because people come and go, and obviously even organizations are born and then die, but they have a much longer life usually than the individuals, and individuals' affiliation also changes much more dynamically. But going back to the question of, does cohesion build resilience? It does, because resilience in network terms is basically, very simply put, is a measure of choice. If you don't have the choices, if you don't have alternative paths to connect, to get information, to get to resources, you're very vulnerable. Being disconnected in an ecosystem is also a trait of the connectivity, right? You can be disconnected by choice or by being forced out of the ecosystem by different players within the ecosystem. But basically that means that there's no information coming to you, there's no mobilization that we can do with you, there's a bunch of stuff that we cannot do because we don't have the channels to reach out to you directly. But the more of this we have, the more choices we have. That's why the core of a core periphery network, and this is a core periphery network actually, the one in Timișoara that we're looking at, the core is much more resilient, even if you take out the key players, because there's these alternative paths of connectivity among all the other players. And if you look at who else is in the periphery, for example, you will find that, you know, a lot of the organizations in the periphery are organizations that are from outside Timișoara, that have, you know, punctually collaborated on, you know, very specific stuff. And then them leaving does not affect the resilience or the sustainability of the cultural ecosystem. The main players in the cultural ecosystem in Timișoara remain main players, and that's, you know, and they were able with this occasion to form new partnerships and new collaborations that are now examples of good practice for them. And then, yeah, maybe in 2024, we don't collaborate again, but maybe in 2027, we remember that we had a very good collaboration during the capital, so now we can reignite that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
So Silvia, I'm looking at, this is really interesting, but I'm also looking at the clock. So we have 2 hours for this full session.
Yes,
and
yes,
I'd love to keep some time for Ștefan and for some open discussion. So I knew you have some other examples prepared.
But I mean, Ștefan can also talk about these as well, because he's in it, right? Another one would be the lockdown mobilization in Cluj, where basically we looked at the collaboration of different organizations and the help they provided during the lockdown, the different types of help they provided, whether it was financial support or, you know, in kind, the collaborations they've done, and even how the areas of action in which they participated connected with one another, with which you can basically take a look at all the identify basically the areas of action where there wasn't much support. And again, you know, when you do this level of mapping, you are able to prioritize perhaps in different ways the interventions. Then finally, we looked at Țara Făgărașului, the civil society in Țara Făgărașului, which was very similar in terms of the questions we've asked. So we asked organizations who they collaborated with in the last 5 years. And what I wanted to show you here is, you know, are just some statistics that are very simple related to, you know, what kind of information we can collect and act upon when it comes to how to continue with the learnings from a network analysis, and also the ranking, the fact that we can rank different organizations based on their centrality within the network and the role they play within that network. And then obviously together with them, we can create different strategies, plans, actions, and so on. But, you know, I can obviously go into much more depth perhaps in the Q&A session. And the last one I wanted to show you is, you asked me, what is a resilient network? Well, corruption in Romania is a resilient network. This is what a resilient network looks like. This hairball of connectivity that is, you know, doesn't seem to have like a hierarchy. It does if you look analytically at it. But this is you know, perhaps why we are not very successful using an instrument such as the whistleblower accounts, which is a form of interviewing, you know, in a network, about a network that we don't see, and then intervening there. It's like doing random shocks on a very, very dense network. So that's definitely why we cannot perhaps, you know, make huge leaps in terms of anti-corruption. But with this network approach, then we have, you know, very easy, so to say, rankings that we can do in terms of who are the organizations that can have a lot of impact on the network structure and intervene there. And with that, I give the floor to Ștefan, and thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to the discussions.
I want to be your student, Silvia. If I'm going to school again, this is what I'm going to study, because it's super valuable, especially in the context whereby we're all moving in a digital networks kind of world dominated by digital environment. And I think it's about time that as a generation, we learn to be more understanding and insightful into how physical networks function and what makes them more resilient and more connected. Now, why are we doing this? So we're doing this because, and I want to do a small recap before going into Ștefan's work. We're in this program, and not just that, we're in the latent emergent community of practice, and we are gathering around the table people that work with physical spaces. They work on heritage revitalization, on taking care of our physical realm of our communities. And oftentimes, this is really valuable, not just in terms of the buildings saved, but in terms of these types of social networks created. And what we want to do is to create some sort of like a learning group, and thank you for supporting this, on how do we also generate awareness about the social networks that are being developed around these physical spaces that we are working around, and how can we be more intentional about developing these networks and these ecosystems. So basically, we're trying to learn about assessing impact and understanding impact of our work and your work, not just in terms of bricks and square meters renovated, but also in terms of social capital generated, to put it bluntly. Now, I'm looking at Ștefan, and I want to invite you and give you the floor to say a few words about your work in measuring and assessing the impact of Monumentum Association, the ambulance for monuments. Now, this is really interesting. I'm really curious. I haven't, I know that you're doing it. I wasn't part of a presentation, so I'm really curious about this. Of course, everyone knows the Monumentum. I don't think there's anyone in the room not knowing the ambulance for monuments. And we just wanted to have an example. I know that you've used the social network analysis as well. Not sure it can be presented, but let's also discuss a bit bringing in different methods into looking at this. Thank you, Ștefan. Yes, Silvia.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention that I checked, and I have the anonymized version of the maps of Ambulanța pentru Monumente. So if you want, I can share it.
Of course, everyone will know that Vaida is in the middle of it. So, I mean, let's not... I want to see how it shows. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can start with that just to build on the there we go.
And now maybe I say a few words about it. So what I wanted to say is that on the left-hand side, you see with green the interventions, like, the different monuments that were intervened upon. And then with purple, you see the people involved, the volunteers involved in that. And then on the right-hand side, you see the social network from that. With different colors, you see the different roles that the people had. So, for example, with orange, you see the team of the ambulance for monuments. With purple, in this case, you see the volunteers. With blue, you see the meșteri. How do you call it? The handy.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah.
So again, talking about the places and the social network about them.
So thank you so much, Silvia, and Marina, Anna, Maria. Thank you so much for the invitation to think about these topics together. I think it's a very important topic and not an easy one, as I am about to say and share. So I can start with a few thoughts on the analysis related to the ambulance for monuments. This is indeed, I think, one of the projects that connects our work on spaces and on civil society or activities, initiatives, community life, in a sense. We have done also various other types of work on community life, civil society, philanthropy, and on spaces. We have looked a bit at cultural spaces and the transformation of cultural spaces after 1989, looking at a bit at the industrial heritage, Jewish heritage, local heritage. So a lot of space is in need of attention, if I can put it this way. And then we have also looked at various aspects related to civil society, mainly in Romania, but also in Europe, community foundations, philanthropic organizations, rules that govern the philanthropic and civil society sector. Țara Făgărașului civil society study, which we have just put out last year. Coming back at the ambulance, and I'll go a little bit through the ambulance study, and then maybe I can bring for some general conclusions, drawing on all the work that we've been doing. On the ambulance, our aim was to look at the potential for activating local communities, the potential of the ambulance for monuments. We obviously, yeah, it was a rather lengthy process in a sense for us, because we wanted to capture, in a sense, what the ambulance already does, but also to have an insight into what it could do more in terms of activating local communities. So looking obviously at the potential part. And what we ended up was a research design which triangulated quantitative, qualitative, and social network analysis methods. Social network analysis is something, depending on how it's being used, more well, in between in a sense, but it's all qualitative, and it can also be quantitative in various ways. Here, so Silvia can explain much better the technical part of it. Yes, so basically this, I think we focused on these three directions, because in this way we can capture, in a sense, some of the numbers that usually we look at when we look at the impact somehow, at least in the minds of most people. We can look at understandings, so the meaning behind some of the interactions that the ambulance engages in and stimulates in local communities. And through the social network analysis, we looked a bit at the network of the ambulance with the volunteers and the locations. Now, obviously, everybody knows the ambulance, and probably a lot of people have taken part in their activities. It's very easy to see at all ambulance activities how they connect to the local community. In a sense, there is a lot of glue, in a sense, in this connection. So it has been really interesting to observe that and to analyze that. It's also been a very, at least for me, I mean, I've been more focusing on the qualitative research in this study, and that meant going and doing interviews with people in various locations, various villages, primarily villages having an incredible patrimony, and being very challenged actually in taking care of that patrimony. So seeing this reality of communities struggling to take care of patrimony has been extremely difficult, in a sense. So it's up to now, at least from my personal perspective, having visited the communities I have visited, it's an incredibly difficult challenge for entire communities to take care of valuable patrimony that they have, monuments and so on, that they have in their property. Yeah, so now I think I should maybe insist a little bit more on the methodology and method part, and then we can go to conclusions. So for the quantitative part, we've done 3 surveys. We looked at the perceptions of community members and people engaged from the community side in the ambulance interventions. We have looked at the perceptions of volunteers who participated, the ambulance mechanism, and I realize I haven't introduced it. Maybe for those that are not familiar with it, I will get there in a moment. So we looked at volunteers that work on site, and that are invited basically by Monumentum or by the partner organization, so by the Ambulance for Monuments. And we had generic questionnaire for coordinators to harvest data about all the interventions. The ambulance has intervened in around 100 locations so far. And what the ambulance does is that it has put together sort of a model relying on 3 pillars. One of the pillar is the expertise that is brought by the ambulance in regards to monuments and their basically punere în siguranță, their protection. And the second part are the volunteers. There are open calls. There are teams of volunteers, sometimes larger teams of volunteers, like 20, 30, 40, sometimes less, engaged in the construction work. And then the third pillar is the community, which contributes in various ways, with resources for hosting the volunteers, with materials, etc., with information about the community and the monument and so on. And often the ownership of the monument rests with someone from the community, the municipality or church, or depending on what kind of a monument we're talking about. So basically we wanted to harvest some quantitative data about the way, how those who participate in these interventions, how they see the interventions, how they connect to the ambulance. And then we have also done interviews to go a little bit more in depth and understand more details about these relationships. We use social network analysis to look at obviously how those who participate connect to locations and to see the connections between the or within the ambulance ecosystem. What we have found is a rather exceptional, I would say, mechanism which basically brings together a lot of energy and meets in terms of preserving the patrimony or these monuments, meets the communities where they have very specific needs, and also manages to build around that an ecosystem of that addresses several other challenges, like for example, architecture students. They don't really have so much training. I've learned in this project they don't have so much training about monuments and this protection of monuments, which is for me has been quite surprising. Through the ambulance interventions, the students can actually have access to practical experiences. Also, there is not so much connection between architecture and crafts. On the craft side, there is not so much going on. So the ambulance project has managed to empower and is hopefully more will follow in this sense the community of crafts people on obviously areas related to preserving certain types of monuments. So in a sense, it's very interesting to observe how basically the knowledge of some actors involved in the ambulance for monuments interventions addresses the needs of others, and the experiences addresses the needs of those who bring certain resources. So there is a very nice complementarity between those who take part in these interventions. A second important point that we've observed, and I think it's extremely important both for spaces and for activities is the high level of trust in the ambulance among the people that have had contact with the ambulance. So the ambulance experiences leaves behind actually a lot of friendships, a lot of appreciation. And the very vast majority of people that we encountered randomly or non-randomly had very positive experiences and had a very high level of trust. Even if it's difficult to start to engage with the community, this level of trust appears, at least as it came from the, as we learned from the qualitative research, this level of trust emerged in given the way the interventions were conducted. Yeah, I think that's also an important point. I think what we can see, so now I'm going to the broader, I also don't want to speak forever, so I'm going to a few more general conclusions or ideas, well, observations, maybe that's the most correct way of putting it. Obviously, and I think we're aware of, we're all in local communities and we see a lot of abandoned spaces. So this we have a large number of abandoned spaces or spaces that are not properly taken care of. And they are the structure of ownership, the structure of usage is not connected with those active in the local communities. Or with those with capacity to take care of spaces that could also support community life in one way or another. In the ambulance study, I think this difficulty at the beginning to connect with the communities also, I think, shows that we do not have a practice of partnership. Or successful partnership in general. And also we do not have, which is essential, I think, for spaces, we have no practice or very little practice, or not to generalize, and a very difficult legal framework for public-private partnerships. A lot of these spaces belong either to the public sector, and then it's very difficult for private actors to engage, or they belong to the private sector, and then it's very difficult for the public sector to engage. Somehow, it's those with resources are not. It's not easy to galvanize different types of resources around spaces, and that, from my perspective at least, is primarily related to faulty private-public partnership legislation. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there is a challenge in how we assess where we are in terms of general development of civil society in communities. Somehow, I think we're much more optimistic than we should be. I think from now the ambulance does intervene mostly in rural areas and sometimes remote areas, but it does intervene also in some towns. Overall, the level of community life in terms of how active communities are is extremely, let's say, in its infancy, maybe if I can put it. We have some pulses, some initiatives, sometimes leaders being active on small projects now, then not being active maybe for a while and then being active again. The way connections happen. So the level of development of community life in terms of an active community life overall is extreme. It's characterized by extreme poverty from my perspective. Now, what you can expect to do in such a context, obviously, it becomes quite challenging. To really renovate a space, you need quite a lot of resources. You need a lot to manage resources. You need an organization with a significant capacity. it takes forever to take from like, let's say, a little bit of active community life to having solid, organized community initiatives that are able to manage millions that are needed to renovate, especially patrimony buildings. So in a sense, I think there are a lot of things here to explore, and I conclude with this. There are things to explore around how do we move from pulses of initiatives to consolidated in, organizations. How do we move from small organizations relying primarily on volunteers to more professional organizations that can actually use resource, utilize larger budgets and deal with larger funding. How can we bring various kinds of resources around spaces? And here I think there is a very interesting aspect, because I think the spaces and latent spaces, they do need energy. So in a sense, there needs to be, in the first phase, in a sense, there needs to be an energy needs to meet these spaces in a way, and needs to adopt these spaces, and needs to be somehow preserved so that these spaces continue take a life of their own. So there is a phase until spaces get a life of their own. And once the spaces get a life of their own, they probably can generate a lot of energy and support other people to have energy, or can share that energy in various ways. I think we do have a big challenge in how we bring energy to spaces here, and how we maintain people with energy around these spaces, so that people don't burn out, leave, die, etc., etc. So and also so that I mean, some of these projects are quite daunting, so someone might need 20 years to mobilize resources to do a more the time frame. How much can we expect someone with energy who cares about a space to stay connected in that care, in a sense? That's also, I think, extremely important, and how resources matches these facts of life. In a sense, we cannot just get married to a space forever. Some people do, and we do sometimes, in a sense, but depending on the effort, depending on the age, depending how much people stay alive, how easy they burn out, and so on, there are a lot of factors that kind of impede people to actually continue to support those spaces. I think I've opened a few things, or a few thoughts that maybe we could discuss on further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ștefan. I have a lot of questions in my head, but I want to leave the floor for reactions and reflections.
I can start with a question.
Yes. I was like, that's the first time I saw Ștefan saying we shouldn't be that optimistic. Sorry. So yes, Sonia, please.
All right. So I was reflecting a lot of the reality in the field that we're also seeing in our programs. And like you've mentioned, the organizations that care for these assets are having a lot of trouble getting the community to care as well. And I was wondering about the role of funding in this entire scheme. And my question for you would be, in your experience, once those organizations start bringing in money to renovate that asset, does that affect in any way the trust of the community?
Well, it depends how that happens and who gives the resource. So it's probably it's a more complex aspect, but somehow, at least again in my experience, in most communities, we are at a level where these spaces are not usable. So it's this sort of phase before doing stuff, in a sense. So somehow there is a lot of struggle to make a space so that you can do something with it. So somehow I have seen a lot of struggle around getting resources to prepare the space. So a lot of people just waiting to get to do what they actually want to do because they don't have where to do it, in a sense. So that's why I emphasized this, how long this takes. Now, resources for taking care of spaces, obviously, I think overall they are appreciated, and the fact, and not only financial, but also knowledge. If we look at the ambulance, the knowledge around patrimony and so on is fabulous. It's appreciated a lot. So the resources are appreciated, and obviously they are not appreciated if they are politically connected, or if there is a negative dynamic, or there are always also negative dynamics in communities. Now, I do think that resources are much more important for maintaining initiatives and organizations alive than for getting the trust of the community. I think the trust of the community is generated through the activities of organizations, engagement, the way the leaders or active people engage with others around them. So there is that energy, in a sense, that is generated in community activities, and that is not so much dependent on money, meaning that it's more dependent on people. Obviously, sometimes people need resources to be in a certain location to continue to eat and live a life, have a home, and so on and so forth. So it boils down to resources in some ways, but there is no direct. I don't think money per se leads to increasing trust or decreasing trust. It's more the dynamics with those leading initiatives, having initiatives in local communities, and then yeah, it could be an intervening factor, the financial part, obviously, always. Silvia, please.
I just wanted to add to that, Ștefan, that what I see a lot of need for is the leadership dimension. So someone who can have the, the vision really for the community to feel like they are permitted to contribute in a way and have and take on synergies of their own from the community. So the leadership aspect, I see it's a lot of oftentimes a blockage, either because it's like inward, too much inward instead and competitive when it comes to being part of an ecosystem instead of cooperative.
I want to build on this. I think that's a super important point. And now in the rural areas, I think that I've seen a lot of collaboration, in a sense, and also indeed leadership. I mean, there is a priest, there is a mayor, there are this teacher or whatever. There are emblematic figures in the local social life, which obviously command some leadership or like some authority, in a sense, or respect or whatever. So, but I did see quite a lot of collective effort, in a sense, several people doing especially women working together, doing things. So I think that initiative, there is a level of minimal in sort of activation initiative in community life. What happens, I think, is that once some leaders that build more stronger initiatives emerge, the challenge is there, in a sense, that it also probably is not so resilient, in a sense. It seems to be extremely difficult to move things in local communities, and not necessarily because only of local dynamics, but because of more, from my perspective, again, we can discuss, it's just a discussion, but I think it's a lot around structural, more structural issues, how you can be better organized, how law allows you to organize, how can you access funding, what funders think and what they imagine. I think most funders in Romania do not, I mean, give away, including the EU, but also give funding for way above the level of capacity of most initiatives in this country. So somehow maybe they're based in Bucharest, Cluj, or big cities, and where obviously the picture looks completely different. but I haven't seen, maybe the community foundations are a good example, working with initiative groups, startup ONG, I think also accepts initiative. So those working with initiative groups maybe have some experience with the difficulties, but it's this, let's say, what you can start an idea, work on a project, but how do you move from there up? It's a very big challenge there, and I think we lose a lot of the leadership that exists, and because of the way the system is constructed at the moment.
Mm-hmm. But just a reflection, a personal reflection on this question on whether bringing in funds changes the dynamics. And I want to comment that in our experience at MKBT, we had the opportunity to do strategic planning in a lot of rural communities across the country. And what I have noticed is that it can be both ways, and it really depends on the attachment and narratives and how the communities relate to the particular asset. Because I have seen communities in which all of a sudden having someone invest in heritage, while other basic needs have been neglected, like access to water and sewage and decent roads, is actually met with frustration. Like, why do you do that? I have other priorities. You know, even if the entity that should do the roads, it's not the same with the entity that brings in the money for heritage, because this is a more sophisticated area investment that caters to needs or that are at the higher level on the Maslow pyramids. And this is really sensitive because it can actually block a community's appreciation for efforts in heritage preservation, just because the other entity that should do the other basic work is not doing its work. Now, on the other way around, we have also worked in villages where you basically have nothing, like you don't have water and something else, and you ask people and you do grassroots consultations, and they want the mayor to invest in the church. And that's because, and you go deeper with questions to understand why is that. I mean, why is it that they don't want to, you know, to fix the bridge there or to do a public transport? And that's because people really appreciate the meaning and the meaningfulness of that building for their community, and the fact that that's the only place in which they meet, is the only convener of the community. That's it, and something beyond the actual religiousness in itself. And to this extent, I think it's important to reflect on the role of heritage in these communities. This is something that we should preserve for their intrinsic value, that they're old and they look nice, or how do we cultivate the sort of purposefulness for different community dynamics, so that people can start to appreciate them and integrate them in their daily lives and routines and community lives and routines. Yeah, thank you for. I'm sorry for, but I wanted to comment on this. So who else wants to bring in some reflections here around the table? So let me spark another field. So we're very new to this field on social network analysis. We know for sure that we want to learn about it, and that's why we invited and encouraged Sophie to do a small project on building a first social network analysis around Shona, which is one of the villages that will be part of the DESKIS program. I want to encourage you, Sophie, to say a few words of how it went so far, if you don't mind. Like, how was it this week, and what were the questions you've worked on, and what's your first insight? We haven't met, so Sophie has been in Shona for the past week, a week or so actually, and at the same time, Diana Iabrașu worked with Monumentum on the work camp around a former household there. Sophie, how was it?
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for all your interesting input and thoughts. And I could really relate to it right now because I'm just coming back from Shona and I was trying myself to do a social network analysis there. And I think it was overlapping with the work camp, as Marina said. So first of all, I got to know everyone who was involved in that camp and how they bring new ideas and new capacities to the place. And I did some interviews with the volunteers and with people from Monumentum. And it was really interesting to get to know their perspectives and their vision for the place and how they would like to bring new life to Shona. And then in the second week, I had more time also to talk to Mihaela, for example, who is like a local of Shona and who's also very active in the village and really supportive in the activities of revitalization. And but she also was mentioning problems, how it can also be difficult to get everyone on the same boat in the community. So I also really appreciate the discussion we had in the end because those thoughts were also coming up. So I asked myself, how is it possible to include more people of the community in projects like in Shona? Yes, but in general, it was really interesting just to get to know all the different people and how they bring new life to the place. And I'm really curious to see how the data I collected will be visualized and if the visualization of the data is the same network as I have it in my head right now, because I'm just curious to see, because maybe it's different. And I hope you have an idea now what I've done, and if you have questions, I'm also happy to hear them.
So we have Helmer around, and we also have Tushnad around, and I want to ask you what's your first impression on such an exercise, and how do you feel, or if you feel this would be interesting for your work in building an ecosystem of support around the heritage sites that you will be working. Now, it's okay if you prefer to answer in Romanian, so no problem.
Se poate și în română atunci?
Da, sigur, Leonardia.
Ok, în regulă. Da, deci, bine, cumva noi suntem foarte noi în acest, nu știu cum să zic, pe această temă, dar suntem din ce în ce mai interesați, având în vedere că avem astfel de parteneriate cu astfel de clădiri, să zic așa. Să confirm. Ok. Și da, ne bucurăm că suntem parte adică în astfel de grupuri și putem învăța și cere ajutor, să zic așa, de la specialiști. Chiar și această temă care astăzi a fost prezentată și dezbătută mi se pare foarte interesant și folositor pe parcursul muncii care va urma de acum încolo. Da, deci, nu știu, deocamdată atât.
Mulțumim, Leonardo. Nu cred că te auzim,
Nu te
Alina.
auzim, Alina.
poate până ne lasă înscris Alina, voiam să zic că e adevărat că exemplul pe care vi l-am arătat eu este dintr-un oraș, din Timișoara, unde s-au investit 45 de milioane de euro într-un an plin de activități. Dar ce mi s-a părut mie foarte interesant și o chestie pe care am regăsit-o cumva și la Ștefan în ce spunea el, și am lăsat și un comentariu acolo în chat, este că a gândi, cumva a implementa aceste mecanisme de trust building și spunea, de exemplu, că în general pentru ambulanța de monumente, ambulanța pentru monumente, oamenii aveau încredere mare în program. Asta este și pentru că, într-o oarecare măsură, la fel ca și ce s-a întâmplat în Timișoara, centrul de proiecte inbuilt cumva a pregătit în modul în care a construit întregul proiect într-un fel în care aceste mecanisme să se regăsească, ele să nu fie întâmplătoare, ele să fie acolo by design. Dacă le pui acolo by design, de exemplu, inclusiv faptul că au schimbat legislația pe guvernanța programului titlului. Titlul se dă în mod normal doar primăriei. Ei au ales să facă guvernanța asta și cu Consiliul Local, Județean și cu centrul de proiecte și așa mai departe. Lucrurile astea și faptul, de exemplu, spuneam pe zona de accesibilitate, faptul că au obligat prin colul de proiecte să accesibilizeze, organizațiile neștiind să accesibilizeze până înainte pentru că n-au mai făcut, au fost forțate să colaboreze cu organizații care să. Faptul că ai avut acolo un criteriu cu diversity and inclusion, you had to collaborate with other organizations in order to do this and that. Deci cumva it was by design gândite lucrurile astea astfel încât în momentul în care lumea se înhamă la un astfel de proiect să poată să și dea din start să intre într-o zonă de increasing trust, building sustainability for the activity și așa mai departe. Deci nu doar intervenția în sine, să zic, la ambulanța pentru monumente contează, ci ce creează ea la nivel de comunitate. Asta trebuie făcut explicit și modul în care implici oamenii în învățare, în follow-up, în orice, să fie acolo by design.
Deci e un soi de, adică un soi, este foarte multă intenționalitate în procesul ăsta. Iar asta presupune și un exercițiu anterior de a ști cum să ai intenția asta efectiv. Și asta sigur că înseamnă o diferență mare între urban și comunități mici, unde exercițiul ăsta există mai puțin și know-how există mai puțin.
Da, vine, de asta spuneam de zona de leadership, știi? Că vine cu un leadership vizionar. Și este de fapt un alt fel de, it's a different mindset altogether decât cel cu care suntem noi obișnuiți. Ca să poți să ajungi la acel mindset diferit, trebuie să, cel mai probabil trebuie să expui pe oameni la a different model. Pentru că altfel nici nu au cum să-și imagineze a different model.
Sophie, I had a question for you. I was wondering, like talking about this mindset, I was wondering how did people in Shona perceived your questions and your effort and your activity there, because you're also not from over there. You also speak a different language, and I'm wondering how are you, like how. Not necessarily how they reply to the questions and what answers do you get, but how do people look at what you're doing?
You mean people who are living in Shona or people from the monumentum?
Both, I would say, if there's any difference.
Yeah. I didn't reflect on it in that, but I think the people from the initiatives, like from the Ambulanza, for example, they were really open-minded and welcoming me. So I think they were just curious what I would do. And yeah, I think people in the village also were curious, but then we couldn't really communicate. So I'm not quite sure what they did think of it, but the first interactions always were friendly. And yeah, but actually I cannot really tell, because I think sometimes they would say something to each other, but I could not understand it. Yeah, maybe we could ask David, who accompanied me yesterday. He helped me to distribute some questionnaires to local people, and he spoke to them in Romanian. And so maybe he could answer this a bit better with how their reaction was. But I felt it was always a friendly and open-minded reaction.
Thank you, Sophie. Silvia, I would build a bit on the reflection that you just had, and I would ask you from the type of analysis that you did, what are some of these key ingredients that actually help in building trust, that would help to be embedded from the design of the process? And maybe this is a question for Ștefan as well, who is working a lot in community development. So this is a reflection that I think we should all have and take into account in our work.
Very good question, Anna Maria, and I'm not sure if it's an easy answer to it, right? But I would maybe go back to the three network building mechanisms that I talked about earlier: homophily, transfer of trust, and preferential attachment. So we know from research, and this is really undebatable by now, shown with empirical studies throughout absolutely different types of ecosystems, that these three are naturally emerging mechanisms. You will always have homophily, you will always have transfer of trust, and you will always have preferential attachment in social settings. Now, if you know that they are occurring, it would be great to be able to control them in a way. So when you design programs that are built at community development, community building, it would be great to have this idea of how do they work in mind, and be able to, as I mentioned, the Center for Projects did in Timișoara, add criteria that go specifically into that direction, so that you can actually work with the mechanisms that appear there, but perhaps not in a way that makes people uncomfortable, or not in a way that would be talking at the woods in a way, right? Like not having, you have to know the community very well in order to be able to work with these locally in different ways. But what does homophily mean? It means, people will always have a tendency to attach to people who are like them in a way. So if you are able to put these values, and by the way, one of the biggest attractions of well, it depends a lot on the, how do you say, like knowledge worker, for example. When it comes to knowledge workers, the main attraction among them is value-based. When it comes to, let's say, blue-collar workers, the main attraction among them is trait-based. Does that make sense? And then you have these, let's say, two extremes, or this range of options when it comes to bringing people together based on stuff that they have in common. If you know that in a village, for example, people just, like when they think about like-minded people or people who are like them, they might be, gender might be a trait like that brings people together, right? And Ștefan mentioned this, the community of women doing stuff. They naturally associate with one another based on this component of homophily. In Timișoara, for example, this idea of doing, I don't know, cultural capital, it was this idea of, having diversity and inclusion. It was just, like two organizations would collaborate, would have a larger propensity to collaborate together if they both value the same things, which was diversity and inclusion. Then when it comes to the transfer of trust, the second mechanism, I think, this is really about closing triangles. That's the way you think about it. So how do you make a connection between B and C when you have this triad of A, B, and C? And again, here, if you are initiating these kinds of collaborations, is thinking ahead. It's usually the follow-up of the activity. So you give, you give a limited amount of resources to activate the community in a certain way. But what happens afterward? The idea is to think about an action, a way in which this will spill over into indirect collaborations. And then finally, when it comes to preferential attachment, is to use these, visible roles, the popular, the influential, the connector. People will affiliate with them, will associate with them in different ways simply because they are more seen, more visible. And this means that in a community, and this is, again, something that cannot be debated right now anywhere anymore, the fact that giving people recognition and acknowledgement for their involvement in the community will create the anti-fragility, right? So imagine, in Romania, we have a lot of communities with a lot of disappointment. Why? People say, nobody ever listened to me. Nobody ever recognized that I've been actually doing things in the community for a long time, and so on. So if you are able to do this as, a funder, a donor, a community activator, giving acknowledgement and visibility to the hidden influencers, so to say, in the community is a very, very impactful thing that builds trust, that builds proactivity, that builds mobilization by, listening to them. What are their needs? What is their experience? By a lot of time they self-activate. You don't even have to activate more than that. But it's because, the people that work with them have a lot of trust in them.
Thank you, Silvia. Stefan, or any other participant, if you have reflection on this from your work?
So I'll just, I think Silvia covered a lot of things quite extensively. So I would say that I think a lot relates to how those with initiative connect to community life. So this ability to see how the community moves and to appreciate that, and I think here social network analysis is extremely useful. Because you can actually map a lot of what's going on around, like a space, an initiative. Like, we don't really have a lot of such tools that are, how should I say, that are accessible for let's say, leaders of initiatives or people driving initiatives in local communities. So here maybe a question for Silvia, if there are any ready, easy to use tools that someone can actually use with an Excel list of I don't know, my funders from and donors from the last year, or how can initiatives how can they use social network analysis for sort of an more strategic but also more practical insights about their own work?
Well, that's a very good question, Stefan. Again, when you speak, when I speak with people who are not trained in social network analysis at all, I don't go that much into network analysis at all, right? So when they do these kinds of things, it's very basic stuff. Like, if you had to connect, well, first, think about, put on paper 15 people that make a difference in your work. Then, draw a circle with 3 areas. One is strategic, one is operational, one is personal. Now start putting the people or the organizations, or however you want to think about, in all these areas. put them closer to the core if you have a stronger relationship with them. Put them, further apart if you have a weaker relationship with them. Put them outside of the circle if you think they are important for your work, but you're not yet connected to them. So perhaps you would want to be connected to them. And just by visualizing this or thinking about making explicit this kind of interaction and potential interaction among the different people for you, I think already puts into perspective things for people. Then I sometimes ask them to say, look, think about two friends of yours that don't know each other that you think should know each other. And of course, you can have variations of that. It's, if you're in front of a professional audience, it's, stuff related to your work. So two people that you work with who don't know each other, but you really think that they should connect to one another. And then make that, act on that, make an introduction email or something like that. Again, you will start seeing that for the collaborations that do, or the synergies that do spark from such interactions, you will hear a lot about the quality of that interaction and the gratefulness of people that, thank you for putting me in touch. It was such a great conversation. Or, I'm, now able to build a project with this other person because of this and that. The other thing that I usually recommend, that this is, I even recommend it for my students when they look for jobs, is, think of the people who can make a difference in your career, in your work, that you are not connected to, and try to figure out who are the people that can connect you to that person. And it's sometimes, when I do this exercise with the students, they are surprised themselves when they find out that they are at very few steps away from the people who could really make a difference in their career or in their work. I actually have this neighbor that, is very well connected to that. Or I have this former professor from high school who can connect me to that professional, and things like that. But thinking about it in these terms, I think, can get you a bit closer to being more strategic when it comes to your own connections to people who can, change something, catalyze actually something in your work.
Yes,
sorry.
That's what I wanted to say, that we have time for one more question. So please, Sonia.
May I have it? So I want to build on Ștefan's question and kind of insist a little bit. At Synergy, we work with organizations, and some of them are in a transformation stage, and some of them are actually looking at scaling up their impact, their operations, so on and so forth. So I think this tool would be really useful for some of them. It's just, with the knowledge I've gained from you right now, I don't understand yet for whom and exactly in which stage. So my question is there such a thing as a starting kit, or any kind of resources? I don't know, maybe a book that you would recommend so we would understand this tool in more depth.
There are very different resources out there, and I can share with you these slides and a recommendation list for something that you can read. Unfortunately, as you know, my students always ask that too, right? And I always tell them, what you find online in general is not very applied to your specific problem. In order to do this matching between the actual problem, the real problem, and the theoretical understanding of how to do this, there could be quite a journey. And there are also dangers in terms of, we didn't talk about now, but how to do this ethically, how to show the results back to the community, and so on and so forth. There are nuances to that. Yes, if you're interested more concretely about this, I think we would need to have a chat and see what exactly would be the problem, what could be the actual roadmap to a solution for that problem. But in general, sure, I can share. There's a lot of information even on YouTube. If you Google any sort of anything from network science to organizational network analysis, you'll find a lot of information out there about it. And then you can tell me whether that, you know, resonates with this, with your context there, or if it's not enough.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everyone who has been attending today. I've personally learned a lot today, and I hope you have too. If there was any question left, or if anyone was English shy and couldn't participate today, please, I will send an email to everyone attending this session, so you can hit back a reply and let us know if there are questions left. Otherwise, we will also upload the video on YouTube, so you can have another look at it if there are still questions left or something left unclear. And as we were talking, as we were saying before, both Marina and I, we are doing this exercise in Shona now, and hopefully we will have more insights with time, because I mean, in the following years, we will try and refine this tool so that we can apply it better in the communities where we are active or where you are active. Yes, and with that being said, I think we're done. Thank you very much for participating. And if you want to be, if any of you is not a member of the latent emergent community, I'll also put up a link in the email, and you can you can register there and stay in touch with us for any upcoming events or anything, really.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And Stefan, sorry for taking up more time from you.
No worries. Thank you, Silvia. And I'm sure it's just a start. I hope for this discussion, and looking forward to next occasions.
Definitely. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.